In any case, I don't want my taxpayer dollars going to the cruel Israeli occupation.
Well, it's a good thing it's not up to you then, isn't it?
Well, it would be, if it weren't for goddamn AIPAC. The Israel lobby is way too powerful.
You mean the Jewish lobby, don't you? Your real problem is you don't like the Jews having power.
Anytime anyone criticizes Israel, you immediately accuse them of being anti-Semites.
Why are you so critical of Israel, and not of the other countries that cause far more suffering?
So you're admitting that Israel causes suffering?
No. I mean, okay, I'm not saying that everything is peachy for the Palestinians. But there's no correlation between the amount of suffering there, compared with Darfur for example, and the amount of criticism each generates.
I'm also against Darfur.
Do you even know what that means? Darfur is a place, not a side.
I'm against what's happening there.
What is happening there? Do you have any idea?
People are being killed, and raped, and starving.
Who's killing who?
That's beside the point. I'm against injustice being perpetrated, no matter where.
But that's my point. You decide where injustice is being perpetrated based on the mainstream media, who automatically side with who they think is the underdog, even when things are really the exact opposite. The media is anti-Israel, so you automatically decide that the Palestinians are the victims, and anything Israel does is bad.
But don't you do exactly the same thing in reverse? You have your mind made up that anything Israel does is good and justified, and view all events through that spectrum.
But everything Israel does is good. You know, I suppose you may have a point. I'd like to think that I'm a little more intelligent than the average blowhole who thinks they know everything.
Since he's suddenly acting a little more intelligent than the average blowhole, I'm going to make this conversation even more unrealistic and admit that he has a point about Israel getting so much attention. I guess you do have a point about Israel getting so much attention.
Do you suppose? Could we actually find some common ground?
Well, I too consider myself an individual open to critical thinking and not just mindless parroting of slogans. Sorry about those Nazi references earlier. I got caught up in the heat of the moment. So let's see if we can find some things to agree on.
Well, let's start with some historical facts. Will you concede that Israel is the rightful homeland of the Jews, and they have the right to be there?
I guess, if you'll agree that the Palestinians have a right to a home of their own there too.
You do realize that there was no such thing as Arab Palestinians until after Israel was created. Before 1948, if you were talking about Palestinians, you were referring to Jews. The Arabs living there were simply called Arabs.
That may be, but shouldn't they have the right to decide what they want to call themselves?
I guess so. I'm not such an extremist that I believe they should be deported, and I definitely don't want them to be Israel's responsibility, so I suppose it does make sense that they should have their own country. With limitations, of course. It would have to be demilitarized, so that it doesn't become a base for terror operations against Israel.
The details can be worked out later. We're just trying to figure out some principles here.
Well, Israel being able to live securely would be a major principle for me.
That's reasonable.
And definitely none of that right of return crap. That's just a pretext to try and get an Arab majority in Israel, and turn it into another Arab country.
Wait a minute. What about all the Palestinians that were kicked out of their homes by Israel?
They weren't kicked out. The Arabs told them to leave so that they could drive the Jews into the sea, and they would be able to return right away. They left voluntarily.
They left because there was a war going on around them.
And what about the Jews who were forced out of all the Arab countries? All of their money and property was confiscated.
They were living peacefully with the Arabs until Israel was founded.
And that makes it all right?
Well, no, I guess it doesn't.
So wouldn't it make sense to consider some sort of compromise? Like where the Arab countries and Israel both pay money into a compensation fund that would help pay to resettle Palestinian refugees into Palestine? I realize it's a stretch to believe that an ideologue like me could so quickly find this sort of pragmatic solution acceptable. But hey, If Begin and Sadat could sign a peace treaty just a few years after fighting a bitter war, is that really so hard to swallow?
I think something like that might work. Yeah, I'm also being ridiculously reasonable here. But honestly, wouldn't the world be a better place if more people could make this kind of sudden switch? Anyway, stay tuned for our dramatic conclusion in Part 4 of I'm Right, You're Wrong.